My name is Sera Calloway. I'm 31 years old, and I spent 8 years believing that if I just tried harder, loved more quietly, and wanted less, my marriage would survive. It didn't. The morning everything ended, I was standing in our kitchen in Raleigh, North Carolina, still in my scrubs from a 12-hour night shift at the hospital. I was a labor and delivery nurse, which was its own kind of cruel irony. I spent my nights helping other women bring babies into the world, then came home to a husband who had stopped pretending he wanted one with me. Owen was sitting at the kitchen island when I walked in, laptop open, coffee going cold, already dressed for his Thursday morning golf game with clients. He was a commercial real estate broker, and he was very good at it. The kind of good that meant we had a 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood where everyone had a Ring doorbell and a second refrigerator in the garage. He didn't look up when I came in. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the sink watching the backyard. We had a bird feeder out there. I'd put it up 2 springs ago because I thought it would make the yard feel more alive. He'd never once mentioned it. "We need to talk," he said. I turned around. He still wasn't looking at me. He was scrolling through something on his laptop, and his jaw was doing the thing it did when he was about to say something he'd already rehearsed. "Okay," I said. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." He closed the laptop slowly, like it was a ceremony. "I'm not happy, Sera. I haven't been for a long time." I set my glass down. "I know. I don't think you do." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were the eyes of someone who had already moved on. Clear, almost relieved. "I've already talked to a lawyer. I had the papers drawn up last week." I remember my hands going very still on the counter, not shaking, just still, like they'd forgotten what they were supposed to do. "You talked to a lawyer," I said. "Last week. I think it's better to do this cleanly. I don't want it to become a whole thing." He slid a manila envelope across the island. "I know the timing isn't great." Timing. 8 years. A miscarriage I went through mostly alone because he was in Charlotte closing a deal. 3 rounds of fertility treatments that he attended maybe half of. And when I say attended, I mean he sat in the waiting room looking at his phone. Timing. I picked up the envelope. I didn't open it. "Is there someone else?" I asked. He paused just long enough. "That's not what this is about." I walked upstairs, sat on the edge of our bed and opened the envelope. The papers were clean and precise. He'd had them drawn up at a firm downtown. I recognized the address. He'd been planning this for weeks while I was coming home at 7 in the morning and crawling into bed next to him and thinking our biggest problem was that we needed a vacation. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there holding the papers until my hands started to feel like they belonged to someone else. His mother called that afternoon. I'd always had a complicated relationship with my mother-in-law, a woman named Genevieve who wore linen in all 4 seasons and had opinions about everything, starting with the fact that she'd never thought I was the right fit for her son. She was pleasant enough to my face, but I'd overheard enough conversations to know what she said behind closed doors. "Owen told me," she said without preamble. "I think this is the right decision for both of you. He needs someone who's more aligned with where he's going in life." I sat with that for a moment. Aligned. As if 8 years of my life were a business strategy that hadn't panned out. "I'd like you to have your things out of the house by the end of the month," she said. "Owen has already spoken to a property manager about listing it, Genevieve. The house is in both our names." The down payment came from Owen's family. I have documentation of that. She wasn't wrong. The down payment had been a gift from his parents. A gift that, I would later learn from my own attorney, was something she'd had structured very carefully 5 years ago in a way that protected their contribution. She'd been planning for the possibility of this moment long before I had. I found out about the other woman 3 days later. Her name was Avery, and she was a 26-year-old marketing coordinator at the firm where Owen's biggest client was based. A mutual acquaintance sent me a photo, the 2 of them at a rooftop bar in Charlotte, his hand at the small of her back, both of them laughing at something on her phone. The photo was from 4 months ago. 4 months. I'd been going to monitoring appointments alone, sitting in a clinic waiting room with a magazine I wasn't reading, while he was already somewhere else entirely. I hired an attorney that week. Her name was Luz, and she was small and precise and not interested in my feelings, which was exactly what I needed. She told me what I was entitled to, which was more than Genevieve had implied but less than 8 years should have been worth. The house would have to be sold, the proceeds split, the retirement accounts divided. Owen had a business asset that was harder to value, and Luz said we could fight it or we could move forward, and I was tired enough that I chose to move forward. I moved out on a Tuesday. My sister helped me carry boxes to a U-Haul. We didn't talk much. She knew if she said anything kind I would fall apart in the driveway, so she just carried boxes and handed me water and let me be functional. I rented a one-bedroom apartment in a quieter part of town, the kind of building where the hallways smelled like someone's dinner and the parking lot flooded when it rained hard. It was fine. It was a place to be. The first month was the worst. I'd come home from night shifts in the gray early morning and sit in a kitchen that fit one person and feel the full weight of all the years I'd been optimistic. I'd been so certain we would find our way through. I'd been certain that love, applied carefully and consistently enough, could make up for the distance that had opened up between us. I started running, not because I thought it would fix anything. I knew by then that nothing was going to fix the specific hole that had opened in my chest, but because it was something to do with my body at 5 in the morning when my brain wouldn't let me sleep. The park near my apartment had a trail that looped around a pond. I started showing up there every morning, rain or shine, and I noticed after a few weeks that there was someone else who ran the same loop. A man, probably mid-30s, who ran at the same pace I did and always had his dog with him. A large, unhurried golden retriever who occasionally stopped to investigate a smell and had to be coaxed back into motion. We didn't speak for 3 weeks. We just nodded at each other the way you do when you share a route with a stranger long enough that ignoring them feels rude. One morning, his dog sat down directly in front of me on the path and refused to move. I stopped. The dog looked at me with absolute serenity. "Scout," the man said, coming up behind him. "Come on." He looked at me. "I'm sorry, she does this sometimes." "It's okay," I said. I needed a reason to stop. He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came out of surprise. He had an easy face, not what you'd call classically handsome, but the kind of face that looked like it had been through things and come out okay. There were lines around his eyes that suggested he'd spent a lot of time outside. His name was James Calloway. No relation, which we both found strange enough to laugh about. He'd grown up in eastern North Carolina, spent 8 years as a firefighter-paramedic in Charlotte, and had come back to Raleigh 2 years ago after his father's stroke to be closer to his parents. He worked now as a fire safety inspector for the county, which he described as significantly less dramatic than it sounded. We fell into step together that morning, and then the next morning, and then the morning after that. We talked about easy things at first. Books, bad television, the dog's inexplicable hatred of squirrels. He didn't ask me too many questions about my life, which I appreciated, because I wasn't ready to answer them. About 6 weeks in, on a morning when the trail was wet with October rain and we were the only 2 people out there, I told him. Not everything, just the shape of it. 8 years, a husband who'd already moved on before I knew we were ending, a house that wasn't mine anymore, the particular grief of a loss that doesn't look like loss from the outside. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "My marriage ended 3 years ago. We'd been together since college, no kids, but we'd been trying. And then one day I came home and she'd already packed. We ran the rest of the loop without talking, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just 2 people who understood something about each other that didn't need to be spelled out. What happened between us didn't happen fast. I want to be clear about that. We were friends first for months, getting coffee after the morning run, sharing playlists, texting about nothing. He fixed a leak under my kitchen sink one Saturday afternoon and stayed for dinner, and we watched a documentary about deep-sea creatures that neither of us was particularly interested in, but neither of us wanted to stop. The divorce was finalized in February. Luz called me at work, and I stepped into a supply closet to take the news, and I stood there in the dark between the IV bags and the extra blankets and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. I texted James after my shift. "It's official," I wrote. "How are you feeling?" He texted back. I thought about it for a minute. "Like someone let the air out of a balloon I didn't know I'd been inflating for 8 years," I wrote. 3 dots appeared. Then, "That's actually a really good description." He took me to dinner that weekend, a real dinner, at a place with cloth napkins, and when he picked me up at my apartment, he looked at me for a moment in the doorway and said, "I've been wanting to do this for a while," and I said, "I know. Me too." By spring, I was spending more nights at his house than at my apartment. He had a house in a neighborhood with old trees and sidewalks, the kind of neighborhood where people wave at each other. His neighbors knew his name. His parents lived 20 minutes away, and his mother brought food whenever she thought he might be running low, which was often. She was warm and practical, and she called me honey without it sounding condescending, and I had to remind myself the first few times that not every family was the shape of Owen's. In April, I missed my period. I thought it was stress. I'd had irregular cycles before, especially during the fertility treatment years, and my body had never been fully cooperative when it came to timing. I bought a test at the drugstore more or less out of obligation and took it on a Tuesday morning before my shift and sat on the edge of the tub waiting. 2 lines. I sat there for a very long time. I took 3 more tests over the next 2 days, all of them the same. On Thursday morning, sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage before my shift, I called my OB's office and made an appointment for the following week. The ultrasound was on a Friday afternoon. James came with me. He sat next to me and held my hand, and when the technician tilted the screen toward us and pointed out 2 small flickering presences and said, "There are 2," I heard the breath leave his bodies in a single long exhale. "2," he said. "2," the technician confirmed very calmly as if she said this all the time, which she probably did. I turned to look at him. His eyes were bright. He looked undone in the best possible way, the way you look when something enormous happens and you realize your whole body has been waiting for it without your permission. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. His voice was rough. "Yeah, I really am. I was about 4 months along when Owen found out. I hadn't told him, we had no reason to speak, and I didn't owe him anything, but the mutual acquaintance who'd sent me the photo of him and Avery apparently made a point of keeping both sides informed. Owen called me on a Sunday afternoon. "I heard you're pregnant," he said. "That's right," I said. A long pause. Is the timing?" "Owen," I said. "We were separated for months before the divorce was final. Do the math." Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its composure in a way I'd never quite heard before. He'd always been controlled, Owen, measured, careful, never showing more than he intended, but now there was something else in his voice, something that sounded like recognition. I want you to know I'm happy for you," he said. It didn't come out convincing. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it more than he did. What I learned later came through Luz, who still touched base occasionally. Owen and Avery were together, officially. She'd moved into the Raleigh house after the dust settled, and about a month after Avery moved in, she started pushing to get pregnant. The tests they ran told a story that Owen had never allowed to surface while we were married. His count was low, significantly. There were options, the specialist apparently told them, but none of them were straightforward. Avery was 26 years old and, from what the acquaintance reported, had very different feelings about those options than Owen did. The house had gone back on the market within 8 months. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard. I want to be honest about that. I felt something quieter, a kind of settling, like a picture that had been slightly off on the wall, finally going straight. I'd spent so many years in that fertility clinic believing the failure was mine, sitting in cold rooms while nurses checked my hormone levels and adjusted my medication dosages and told me to stay positive. I had internalized so much of that failure as something specific to my body, my inadequacy, my inability to be what the marriage needed. And now here was this truth that had apparently existed all along. I told James one evening when we were sitting on his back porch, the sun was going down, and Scout was lying at our feet in a specific patch of grass she'd claimed as hers. I'd started to show, 22 weeks, 2 babies, my body finally in something it had apparently always been capable of. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I was done, he reached over and took my hand. "You okay?" he said. "I think so," I said. I spent so long thinking I was the problem." "You weren't," he said, simply. "I know that now." We sat there while the light changed and Scout sighed in her sleep, and the neighbors 2 houses down started their grill, and I felt, for the first time in years, like the air in my lungs was actually doing something useful. We got married in July, in his parents' backyard, under a string of lights his father had spent 2 weekends putting up. I was 7 months pregnant and I wore a pale yellow dress, and James cried when I walked toward him, which he would later deny unconvincingly in front of everyone at the reception. My sister made a toast. His best friend from the fire department made a toast that was mostly a story about a camping trip that reflected poorly on everyone involved. His mother held my hand during dinner and told me she'd known from the first time he mentioned my name. Our daughters were born in September, 5 weeks early but strong, both of them in the NICU for 2 weeks before they were ready, and I will not pretend those 2 weeks were anything other than the most exhausting and terrifying of my life. But James slept in a chair next to me for most of it, and his parents came every day and sat in the waiting room and brought food that nobody had the appetite to eat, but that felt important anyway. And my sister drove up from Wilmington and stayed for a week and folded laundry and didn't try to say the right thing because she knew by now that there wasn't one. We named them June and Laurel. On the morning we brought them home, James carried them in their car seats through the front door of his house, our house, and set them carefully on the living room floor and straightened up and looked at me across the room for a long moment. "I know this isn't what you planned," he said. "No," I said. "It's better." He smiled. Scout came over and investigated the car seats with grave scientific thoroughness, and James scooped her gently away before she could do anything inadvisable. And I sat down on the couch in the early morning light and I thought about the kitchen in Raleigh, where I'd stood in my scrubs holding a manila envelope, and the parking garage where I'd sat in my car crying after my lawyer's phone call, and the supply closet between the IV bags and the ultrasound room and the cold empty months in between, and how none of it, not a single part of it, looked the way I thought the important parts of my life were supposed to look, and how all of it, somehow, had led exactly here.